will be the host for this event along with my fellow mate Alisha. So we heartily welcome the warm gathering to this event of learning, sharing, understanding, and a lot more. This vodka shot is about the fusion of OAuth and CI/CD. Let me give you a brief gist of what vodka is. So vodka stands for value-oriented discussion for quality analysts. Main motto of this event is to come and learn something new. Through this event, we try to deliver the latest trends in the market and share our experiences and practices that we follow. I assure you will get enough takeaways from today's session because we are going to talk about the trends which can only be learned from experiences. So without taking much time, I will quickly hand over to Alisha for sharing today's agenda.
Yeah, thank you, Payal. Hello, everyone. Now let me discuss the agenda for today's event. We'll be having 3 talks. Our first talk is about OAuth 2.0 by Shubhashree, Deshpande, and Hari Gautam. Next would be CI/CD using BuildKite by Pooja Goel and Kritika Vora. And lastly, we would be having a session on integrate Postman test to CI by Sachin Gupta. So before we start, few things we would like to mention to maintain the flow and decorum. In case you have any questions, you can ask in the Q&A section and we will take them up once the respective talk ends or at the end of the session as time permits. So now moving to our first topic, that is OAuth 2.0 by Shubhashree and Hari. This talk is all about how to play around the token-based authentication. We shall also understand about the architecture and workflow of OAuth 2.0. So I request Shubhashree and Hari to give a brief introduction of themselves and proceed with their talk. Handing over to the speakers.
Hey, thank you, Alisha and Payal. Hello all, a very good afternoon. A warm welcome to you all for this wonderful knowledge sharing session. Before getting started, I would like to introduce myself. I am Shubhashree Deshpande, joined ThoughtWorks last year in the month of June. Overall, 4 years of experience as the automation test engineer. My automation test and journey includes web, mobile, and REST API automations as well. Apart from this, in my free time, I would like to travel, cook, and paint. And also, I'm having keen interest in learning different technologies as industry demands. So this is a small intro about myself. I would love to ask Hari to go with a small intro. Hari, please.
Yeah, so hi all. I am Hariyam Gautam and I'm having almost 4 years of experience as quality analyst. And in ThoughtWorks, it's almost 1.5 years. So currently I'm tagged with E4R research oriented projects. And basically I'm having a background of web application testing. I'm having some backgrounds of development also, which is related to Java and backend. And I'm a little bit enthusiastic about physics, text, and new text like this OAuth and this token authentication and authorization. Yeah, that's it about me. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Hari. Let me share my screen. So now let's get started with the most awaiting session, that is OAuth 2.0. Just a small request before beginning with the session. Let's make this session more interactive instead of one person talking all the way. Hope people join me on the same. So all set. Now let's discuss. Maybe in recent time, the word OAuth is creating lots of buzz in the industry, and also many discussions are going around the same. So first, let me abbreviate this. OAuth stands for Open Authorization, and anybody can implement this. Many people think OAuth as a secure way to log in, or some people also think that it is a standard protocol to secure their application. But now I am more curious to know what you people think OAuth means. Can I just have a few answers from you people in the chat? Hari, can you access the chat? Okay. Never mind. I got one reply saying OAuth never shares password data, but instead uses authentication tokens to prove an identity between consumer and service provider. And Asha says it's a way to identify user. Um, Okay, like I partially agree with the inputs that you have been given, but after getting the inputs from you, so I have decided to discuss in depth about this and will end up with the brief knowledge on OAuth 2.0 at the end of the session. So we have always heard about two terms. When it comes to OAuth, that is authentication and authorization. So when it comes to OAuth, many people think auth as authentication, but actually it is authorization. So to get a difference between these two, authentication and authorization are two important security processes and administrator use to protect systems and information using these two terms. So authentication verifies identification of a user or a service, whereas authorization determines the access right. So authentication Yeah. So authentication is a process that verifies someone or something to say who they are. For example, when you need to access an online site or a service, we usually enter username and password. Then behind scenes, it will compare username and password with the username and password that is already stored in the database. So if the information matches, then the system assumes that you are a valid user and it will grant you the access. Therefore, your system assumes the principle of something that user only knows and he provides the valid information about himself. So this is a one way to understand the authentication, and there are many other ways to authenticate. As I said about the username and password, we also know like we can authenticate using OTPs, or we can authenticate using voice recognition, or we can authenticate using biometrics. So there are different ways to authenticate. So coming to authorization, it is also a security process that determines user or a service to the level of the access that they have with that particular application. For example, I'm working as a QA and I have written some script, and I'm raising a PR on the Git. Now, I also have the access to review others' PR. But assume like Hari is a senior QA who has access to approve and merge others' PR along with the review process. So here, me and Hari both have permission to view the code, but whereas Hari has access to merge the PR as well. So the level of access differs here. By this, I can clearly convey that authentication allows me and Hari to access the GitHub, whereas authorization says what I can do once the system has granted me the access. So now it's very clear like what authentication and what authorization means over here. So after conveying so much on authentication and authorization, now let us understand one traditional approach of the authentication that we are most commonly using. So here, as we all know, and also the image says, I'm talking about the username and password. So here, one of the traditional authentication way is the password-based authentication. So just a brief about this, like passwords are most common method of authentication. Password can be in the form of strings or a special character or numbers. To protect ourselves, we need to create a strong password which includes combination of all these. But nowadays, passwords are prone to phishing attacks, and this bad hygiene is really weakening the effectiveness of the system. The truth is that the people feel difficulty to remember the password, so they are making a convenient way out of it. They are keeping the same passwords or the simple passwords across the accounts. So as per the statistics, a person has on average 25 different accounts, but only 54% of the users maintain different and reliable passwords for each of the account they have. So this has become one of the easiest way for the hackers to find the match of a password and grab the information of your profile. So as we can see this in our image, client hits the server to get the necessary access for the protected application or the service. To grant the access, server is asking back to the client with the valid username and the password. And as I said, like what happens in the back end, I'll be in like I assume me as a client, I'll be sharing my username and password, and if it matches, I'll be getting the access. So after this successful authentication, server give us the particular access to the application or the service that we are currently using. So now mostly like we are clear with what falls under authentication and what falls under authorization with his picture. So I have conveyed all this information to you as a prerequisite to understand OAuth 2.0. As we discussed on weak passwords, phishing attacks, or hacking, blah blah blah. Now we will discuss how we secure the application better with the tokens. Moving to the next slide. Yeah. So as we discussed, in the introduction only, they conveyed OAuth is nothing but playing around the tokens. So now let us understand like how exactly this particular thing works. So they playing around tokens is nothing but uh, OAuth authorization process. So before I would like to uh, go in depth about OAuth 2.0, I would like to make it very clear. OAuth is not an API or not an web service. OAuth is a standard authentication protocol or a delegation protocol which allows user to interact between the application or services on behalf of the user without sharing the passwords. It just play around the tokens. Hence, it is also called as token-based authentication. As we saw in our previous slide, that is traditional authentication, we used to get access to particular application or service by providing the valid username and password. Now let's see how can we get authenticated without sharing the passwords. Here also we can see client server combination in his particular image. So later we'll take an example to understand the things better. Now let's go with the image that is present and we'll understand just the basic way of working. So when client makes a request to the server to get authenticated to the application or the service using other application, what do you think? Server will just share the username and password instead of we sharing username and password? No, then it's completely wrong. So I would like to make it very clear, server will never share username and password. So instead of that, what server will do? Server will share the token so to grant the access to the third party application. So now um
let's see how this is going to happen here. This is one of the misconception that people were having about OAuth. Like instead of we sharing the password, when we just click on sign in with Google or sign in with Facebook, the server with the Google server or the Facebook server will share the username and password. So to let go of this misconception about OAuth, by this image, I can explain you, like as client makes a request to the server will initially send the access code. That is a temporary grant. So as a response, client will send back this access code back to the server. Now server again validates like whether the access code or the temporary grant that is provided is valid or not. If it is valid, then only the server provides the access token or the bearer token only if the access code is valid. Now, same token is sent back to the server to request the necessary user information. If the token is valid, server sends the protected resource information to the client, and now user is allowed to access the dashboard of the application or the service. Hope now we got an intro on how exactly OAuth works. As we observed, passwords are never shared here. I would like to repeat this again and again. We can see it just played on the token. Like we got the access just by passing the bearer token over here, but the passwords are not shared and everything is achieved without any human interventions. So with this, I can conclude that we can secure our credentials and also we can save our time and also just we can provide the necessary information to the application based on the scope that is provided or requested. The moreover thing is like OAuth supports both web and mobile applications. So this is a small intro on how OAuth works. Maybe Hari can explain you more about the architecture and the workflow in the coming slides. And then we can take up the example to see how we are going to set up this OAuth. Hari, I request you to continue with the next slide, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shubhashree. So from here, I'm going to explain what are the architectures on which this OAuth 2.0 is working. So the first thing in this authentication using token, which is explained by Shubhashree, I just want to add one point from here that what are the requirements of bearer token? So in web application, basically we works on HTTP protocols. So these HTTP protocols are stateless protocol. Each and every request is independent of their previous and their further request. So to make them stateful, we add bearer token so that to authenticate an user, we don't need to provide the user ID and password again and again. So that's why we are using bearer token. Could you please change the slide? Yeah. So the first, I would like to explain the history how OAuth 2.0 came into existence. So the first thing is OpenID. So what OpenID is? So this is like OpenID protocol, which came in 2005 by OpenID Foundation. The main purpose of this OpenID protocol was to cross identity verification only for the authentication. If an application want to authorize a user, so irrespective of the registration of that user, they can directly took their information from an identity provider like Google, Facebook, or some other platforms. In this, they will pass a bearer token, and that bearer token is like JWT token. This JWT token will be passed by this Google identity provider or different identity providers to this Android app. And this app will verify this, authenticate this user. So one means good thing about this protocol is irrespective means Google is not showing means sharing any password with this Android application. Irrespective, they are just sharing the JWT, which is JSON Web Token. And in that JWT token, they have all the informations which required an Android app to register that user. Yeah. So this is about OpenID. And now, what is OAuth? So the OpenID was only for authorization. Now we need something for authentication. The OpenID was for authentication. We need something for authorization also. So for authorization in 2014, I think this OAuth came into existence. So what was OAuth? So for authentication, we just need the user identifications, like what are the Gmail ID and what are the name, what is the age. But if a third-party client application want to access resources user of other applications of a user, so they will use this OAuth protocol. So how OAuth protocol basically works? So there are basically 4 components which is present in OAuth. The first is like user, the second is like third-party application, the third is like identity provider, and the fourth is like this resource server. So in this picture, there is an abstract. So this user is actually getting an access from this Google account after giving their Gmail ID and password. And this Google will authenticate this user and even authenticate this third-party application. After that, it will pass a token, and using that token, this third-party application can access the resource of this application. So this is an abstract view of OAuth. I will explain the detailed view in the next slides. Yeah, so this is like a little bit detailed view. So what exactly is happening? So if I have created an application, a client application, and I want to access some resource of a user from another resource like Google Drive or some Gmail or some different applications. So what Google has done, Google has provided their API. And using those APIs, I can directly access the resource server, but I cannot access that API irrespective of some other user. I need some token so that I could say this resource server that, hey, I just want to access a resource of this user. I don't have credentials. I just have consent of this owner. So could you please provide me this resource? So what exactly is happening? If a resource is, if this user is accessing this client application, this client application is sending this user to the Google server, and the Google server is authentication the user. And after authentication, they will share a consent that, hey, this is the consent. Could you please accept this consent? After accepting this consent, authorization grant will be shared with the client. Using this access token, first there will be a code, and using this code, this client will access the access token. After using this access token, they can access the resource of that user. Yeah. Could you please change next slide? Yeah, so this is a more detailed view of OAuth architecture 2.2. So basically, first we will divide in 5 main components, which is like user agent, browser, web client or the applications which we have developed, the authorization server of Google, and the resource server. So what exactly is happening here? If I want to access a resource server, a resource of a user, so how this flow will go? First, I will enter the URL of my application. Then my application will respond me with a redirect authorization server. And this browser will redirect me to the authorization server of this Google or some identity providers. After this authorization server will present me a UI that please provide your user ID and password. After providing this user ID and password, a consent will be there. After accepting this consent, this browser will again redirect me to the authorization server. And after accepting this consent, there will be a redirect URL, which we have passed during this registration of the web server application in this authorization server. After that, a code will be generated, and this code will be redirected to the web server. Using this code, again, this web server will request this authorization server to the request token. After validating this code, this authorization server will return an access token, and using that access token, this web client can access the resource server. And in this process, there are multiple redirections. Mostly the redirections are occurring. So actually, these redirections are known as authorized redirected URI. There are multiple authorized redirected URI which we have given during the registration of this web server in the authorization server. Yeah, I will explain, I will give you a demo how exactly we are registering our web server in this authorization server. So in the next slide, I will give you the exact demo. We have created a small application also on OAuth 2.0 protocol. So we can see that how exactly this is working. Yeah. So this OAuth architecture was basically only for authorization, not for authentication. But in 2014, the OpenID Foundation created a new protocol, which is like OpenID Connect. And what OpenID Connect was, so OpenID was only for authentication and OAuth was only for authorization. So they combined and they created a new means new protocol, which is like OpenID Connect. And OpenID Connect is like a combination of authentication and authorization. So currently in any applications which we are using in like web applications, Android applications, we are actually using OpenID Connect protocol. And we sometimes used to say also open auth 2.0. So this is also known as auth 2.0, which is OpenID Connect. Yeah, this is the architecture, the same architecture which we have already explained in the previous slides. So this is the almost same, only the authentication and authorization both is happening in this process. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a demo. Means sometimes whenever we try to log in some applications nowadays, so we used to get this continue with Facebook, continue with Google. So this is what the OAuth 2.0 applications implemented. So without giving my Facebook and Google password and without even registering in this application, we can directly continue with Facebook. So this is actually working on OAuth 2.0 protocol. Yeah. So I think I have explained the basic terms, and after that I will give you a demo. Before that, I will hand over to Shubhashree. She will explain what are the drawbacks of OAuth 2.0.
Yes, exactly. Before going to the drawbacks, I would like to add a few more things on the OpenID Connect that we have. Um, I know like OAuth 2.0 OpenID Connect, it's going overhead, but not to worry more. Like what I would like, what Hari said is like OAuth OpenID Connect is a combination of authentication and authorization. I would like to explain you how exactly authentication and authorization are combined over here. Imagine user has the existing account and he is now supposed to log into the multiple websites and he don't want to share the passwords. Now, here the OpenID Connect comes into the picture. Even we used to do the same thing using OAuth 2.0, but OAuth 2.0 was with respect to the authorization. It was never concerned on the authentication part. So here the application doesn't know who the end user is. Like it even doesn't know, like it just works on the token or the access grant, but actually it even doesn't know like who am I, what is my name, what is the email that I am having. So it's completely unknown, but it's actually nice to know like who is the end user. So now let's make an example to know more about this, how OpenID works. We might be very familiar with these two buttons in every application as we are seeing here, like continue with Google or continue with Facebook. So these are the very common buttons now we are seeing. So when we hit this button, we are redirected to the, we are like, suppose if I am using Google, like if I want to sign in with Google, then I'll hit the sign in with Google button. So when we hit this button, we are redirected to the Google authorization server. Now this redirected URL has very similar structure that OAuth 2.0 is having, and but the small scope here is we can request for the additional scope in the URL itself. The scope is nothing but asking the permission for the additional information about the end user. So as a user, obviously I don't want to share everything about me to the third party application. So that's why I'm limiting the scope over here. So for example, I don't want to share everything that is there in my Google Drive. I just want to have the permission to access or edit the files that are there in the drive. I don't want to upload or I don't want to delete. I don't want to give that permission. So the only scope I'm requesting here is to edit or to access the files that are already there in the Google Drive. So here now I'm requesting the scope, special scope, which means we are saying like, hey Google, I actually want to know more about the user. So I need an identity token to know more about the user. Now you may wonder, what is this identity token? So with all these slides, we were just talking about the access token, but now I'm adding the identity token to the picture. So what is this identity token? Identity token is nothing but the JSON web token. So that we call it as JWT, which has some information on the scope that we have requested. So and OpenID Connect has standardized some scopes that is like you can request for the email, you can request for the nickname, or you can request for the profile information, etc. For example, now if I'm requesting for the email, then this ID token, that is identity token, will be having the information of the email along with the signature. What the signature means? This will be in the form of JSON. That's why we call it as JSON web token. And this the signature will be like, it will be called as an extra attribute where it will be showing like something called as email verified is true. So which means we are not allowing the hackers to, like, suppose if we are just playing with the tokens, there are many chances like hackers can steal them and then they can use it use our profile. But with the signature, I'm making sure that I'm even secure in the application mode. So for security reason, we are also registering our application on the authorization server as well. So now we are will be getting the code to get back the access token, and with this access token I'm allowed to use the third party application. So with this I can clearly say how the authentication and authorization are combined here. The ID token that we are getting, that is helping me to authenticate. That is like I am getting to know who is the end user, at least some information about him, like email or name, something. But when it comes to access token, it is just granting the permission. So granting the permission is nothing but the authorization. So this is the combination of authentication and authorization. So coming to the end of the session almost, like as we see two sides of the coin, obviously we'll be having some advantages and disadvantages for each and every new innovations. I believe to overcome this advantages of one of the application, we try to build a new system. So that is how the newer invention come up. So let's discuss on the disadvantages. So here we have listed around three. The first one is there is no common format. As a result, each service requires its own implementation. Obviously, each service that we design is for the different purpose, and it has its own protocols, like how it should work and how they want to register on the authorization server. So I can clearly say like each application needs to be registered on the authorization server first. So this process cannot be same for all. Every application is different. So the registration for every application will be different, because when we register, we'll be getting the client ID and client secret from the authorization server. Maybe Hari will show you in the demo like how we are setting up the client ID and client server, client secret. So these two will be different for each and application. So we don't have the common format for the implementation. And the next thing is like in the process of user verification, sometimes you have to make the additional request to get the minimal user information with the help of JWT token, but not all services support this. So as I said, like when it comes to OAuth, we were just playing with the access token. We were never introduced to the JWT token here, but with this access token, I was not getting to know anything about the end user. I was left completely blank. But when this JWT token came into the picture in OpenID Connect, I can now say that I'm able to send some information to the third party user about who I am. So this is one of the disadvantage of OAuth, and when where it was covered using the OpenID Connect. So that's why I'll say like OpenID Connect is not completely different. It is just an identity layer that is built over OAuth 2.0. And the third thing is, the token is stolen and attacker gains access to access to secure the data for a while. To minimize this risk, we have introduced token with signature. So I mentioned in my OpenID Connect explanation. We are going to have our application more secure, but also hackers will find their own way to prone our application or to grab the information. So it's always better to have the token with signature. As I said, just by providing the email, I'll be providing just my email a name or email or a name information. But when we say that, it also sends an extra attribute saying like email verified is true or something. So this is what we call it as a signature. So this will be in the form of JSON. So like this wise, we are minimizing the risk that we are facing with OAuth 2.0, like when we just played with the tokens. Now using JWT token with signature, we are making sure like we are secure and we are our applications in a more better way. So with this, I would like to end up the theoretical part of this OAuth 2.0. Hope the information shared was useful, and we both have tried to give the best of our knowledge on what is OAuth 2.0 and about its architecture, workflow, and how we are going to set this up. And like also what's the difference between OAuth 2.0 and the OpenID that is newly introduced. Now I would like to request Hari to proceed with the demo. Hari, take it forward.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Shubhashree. So now I will show that how we can implement OAuth 2.0 in any application. So the first process, I'm just sharing my screen. Yeah. The first thing what we have to do, if we are creating any application, so we have to register that application in our identity providers like Google and this GitHub. So currently I'm doing using GitHub. So what I have done, I have registered an application, and after registering this application, I have provided this homepage of URL. So currently this which applications which I'm using, it is hosted in my local. So I have provided the URL of my local. Then I have provided an authorization callback URL. So this is very important part of OAuth 2.0. I will explain it later that how we are using this thing. So we have to pass this authorization callback URL. After that, after saving this, we will get this client ID and client secret. So this client ID and client secret is of application which we have created, not for user. So we in this process, we have registered our application. After registering, Spring Boot have provided us many libraries for OAuth 2.0. We don't have to implement and call the endpoints and APIs of OAuth 2.0 by ourselves. This work will already be done by Spring Boot, and Spring Boot have provided some libraries for that. So what we have done, we have provided our client ID and client secret. So this client ID and client secret, which I got after registering in GitHub and Google. So now this GitHub and Google have been already registered our application. Our application has been already registered in GitHub and Google. Now I will run this application. So I'm starting Docker. So using Docker instances, I have built my application. So in this application, we are going to see how we are authenticating and authorizing using this OAuth 2.2 protocol. Yeah, so this column is up, and we are currently starting. The database, and the database has been started. After that, we will start our application. And this application is running on the port of 8484, which I have provided in this application.yml of Spring Boot. Yeah, so this application. After hitting this URL, I'm directly redirecting with the GitHub and Google. This part is coming from here. As I have registered in GitHub and Google, and I have provided my credentials of client ID and client secret. So automatically Spring Boot is providing me a login page of GitHub and Google. So when I will click this GitHub, what exactly is happening here? Let me show on this network tab. Just a second, I have to clear the cookies. So yeah, I have so here we have two options, GitHub and Google. So using these two options, we can authenticate ourselves. If I will click GitHub, so what exactly is happening here? First, you have to see this network tab, how the calls is going through. So when I click this, so this first call was like HTTP localhost 8484 authentication authorization GitHub. And this call is of my application. So this call is going to my application. And the response of this call is like redirecting to this URL. So this URL is of GitHub application. And in this URL, my application is providing their client ID. My application has already provided their client ID and their scope, that what scope they want to access of that user. So in this, we can see the scope is like read user. They just want to read what are the what are the information of user, like mail ID, username, and other stuffs. After the second call will be the redirection call of this first call. In this redirection call, these type of client ID, scope, state, this state is for a security purpose, and the redirect URL, which we have passed during this application registration. So we just want after the authentication of the user, the GitHub will redirect to us, to the client, to this URI with the code. So so as a user, I'm just registering in this application using this GitHub. So what I am getting, so currently as GitHub has already authenticated me that this is my account. So this had shown me a consent. So hey, this is the consent, and application name OAuth app is just want to access your personal information data. Do you want to authorize or do you don't want to authorize? When I will authorize, it will redirect me to the registered URI or the URI which I have registered on the application with a code, this GitHub code. And using this code, I can access the authentication token, as this page is not means mapped. So it is showing white label error page. So this is the code which we are getting, and using this code, we can fetch the access token, and using that access token, we can get what are the information of that user ID. We can also see some more stuffs on playgrounds like OAuth. So the first part of this playground is like register a client. I will register a client. The client is by default, it's like a demo. It's a playground where we can practice our OAuth 2.0, how OAuth 2.0 is working. So after clicking on registration, we got this client ID and client secret of the application. After that, we can continue. And in this continue, we just want to send a request to this authorization server that, hey, a user want to authorize themselves using OAuth 2.0. So you can give your login ID and this password. So after giving this login ID and password, I'm getting a consent that application name client registration want to access your information. After accepting this consent, I will get a token. This application will get a token. So this is the token. In this token, I'm getting a bearer token, and using this bearer token, I can get the information of the user, like what are the email ID of the user, which we have registered here. Let me show you this login. But password, we are not getting the password. We are just getting the information or scope which we have given our applications. So this is the demo of this application. I would like to hand over the next part to Shubhashree.
Quick time check, Shubhashree and Hari. For the next talk, we have 10 minutes left.
Sure. We are done with our demo. As we said, we have given you the example of OAuth 2.0 and how we set up this. Being a QA, I just don't want to stop with the setup. I also want you people to know more on the validation part. So being a QA, once we set up the application, how can we validate this using Postman? So that is also one of the most important thing. When somebody sets up the application, as this talk is more about the QA, so being a QA, obviously we would like to validate this. As we have a shortage of the time, we cannot show you the demo on how we are going to validate it. We using the Postman, but I personally have written a blog on this, how we are going to validate all the OAuth 2.0 validation using Postman. So I'm sharing the link of my blog in the chat. You people can go through it, and if you have any questions or concerns, then please come back. We are happy to help you. This blog contains the open source, that is Gmail setup. As the Gmail is available for free, I have made use of the same Gmail, and I have registered using the Gmail application itself. So you can also just try the steps that are already provided in the blog.
maybe like in case of any questions and concerns, like I'm very happy to help you with the validations apart from setting up the OAuth 2.0. Thank you from my side and Hari. Hope we have covered a lot on OAuth 2.0, and we also have learned much while sharing the knowledge. So this was best of our knowledge. Thank you, people, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Thanks a
everyone.
lot, Shubhashree and Hari. We have a question in the Q&A section. So could you
Yeah.
take that up? And attendees are requested, like if they have any questions or concerns, they can post in the Q&A section.
Yeah, sure. So how to use OAuth with IoT microcontrollers? Here, what I can say is when it comes to OAuth 2.0, it is not concerned with the IoT, but we do have a different framework called as OAuth IoT framework, which is specifically designed for having OAuth implementation with IoT. We do have a gateway setup over there. I don't have much idea on how we are setting up the gateways and how we are syncing up with the cloud-based application. We really have to go with the OAuth IoT framework for this. But when it comes to OAuth 2.0, with OAuth 2.0, we cannot access the cloud-based. To have this particular IoT setup, we have a different framework. Maybe like I can research on this and I can share you the link on how what IoT framework is designed and how the architecture works over there. Hope it clears your doubt, Asha.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions? We
Yes,
have a hand raised.
Nandini is one who is who have one question.
Yes, Nandini, please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, Nandini, you have raised your hand.
I've shared the feedback form link in the chat. We'll pause here for 2 minutes and then probably we can proceed with our next talk. I request attendees to please share your valuable feedback.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Shubhashree and Hari. It was a great talk.
Thank you so much.